Good morning, and welcome back to the Morning Endurance Call. I'm Keith Erwood, and this is a free, daily 15-minute or less leadership ritual for business leadership, business owners, executives, and preparedness professionals who want to build stronger businesses, think more clearly under pressure, and lead with more clarity in uncertain times. Each weekday morning, we spend a few minutes talking about what it really takes to build stronger businesses, stronger leadership, and stronger preparedness in a world where disruption is part of reality. Today's topic is this: crisis leadership starts before the crisis. Excuse me. This matters because one of the most common misconceptions in business is that leadership reveals itself in the moment. And to a degree, that is true. A crisis does reveal leadership, but it does not create it from nothing. More often, a crisis exposes what was already there. It exposes whether leadership clarity was built in advance. It exposes whether roles were understood. It exposes whether decision-making discipline existed before pressure arrived. It exposes whether people knew what mattered most. It exposes whether the organization had prepared itself to function when conditions became uncertain, fast-moving, and uncomfortable. That is why crisis leadership starts before the crisis. Because when pressure rises, leaders do not magically become more prepared than they were the day before. In many cases, they become more dependent on whatever habits, assumptions, structures, and disciplines were already in place. That is the point. A crisis does not give leaders brand new capabilities. It tests the ones they already built. And that is why preparedness is so deeply connected to leadership. When people think about crisis leadership, they often imagine the visible parts: the press statement, the team meeting, the executive call, the calm voice, the decisive response. Those things matter. But underneath all of that are deeper questions. Did leadership define the decision authority ahead of time? Did the team clarify priorities before pressure hit? Did people know who needed to be informed, involved, or empowered? Did leaders understand what was truly critical to protect? Did the organization practice how it would think, escalate, and respond? Did leadership build a culture where issues surface early instead of being hidden? Those are the things that shape crisis performance. So when I say crisis leadership starts before the crisis, what I mean to say is this: the way leaders perform under pressure is heavily influenced by the discipline, alignment, and clarity they built before the event ever occurred. That is why some organizations respond with relative composure while others fall into confusion very quickly. It is not always because one group has smarter people. Often it's because one group prepared leadership capability more deliberately. And this is important because crisis leadership is not just about being calm. Calm matters, composure matters, but calm alone is not enough. A leader can sound calm and still be unclear. A leader can sound confident and still be misaligned. A leader can appear composed and still lack structure, direction, and useful decision making. Real crisis leadership requires more than emotional control. It requires clarity, prioritization, communication, decision discipline, role awareness, and the ability to function when information is incomplete. That does not happen by accident. It is built. Let's make this practical. What does crisis leadership built before the crisis actually look like? First, it looks like clarity of priorities. When disruption happens, leaders need to know what matters most. People, life safety, critical operations, customers, revenue, reputation, regulatory obligations, technology, facilities, communications. If leadership has not already thought through priorities, it becomes much easier to waste precious time debating what should be obvious. Second, it looks like clarity of roles. Who leads, who advises, who decides, who communicates, who coordinates, who owns operations, who owns technical response, who keeps leadership informed. When those things are unclear, crisis response slows down, overlaps, and/or fragments. Third, it looks like decision-making discipline. In a crisis, not every decision can wait for perfect information. Leaders need to know how they will make timely, reasonable, business-informed decisions under uncertainty. That requires practice, that requires structure, and that requires maturity. Fourth, it looks like communication readiness. Many crises worsen because communication worsens. People do not know what is happening. Leaders send mixed signals. Teams operate on different assumptions. Stakeholders receive partial or conflicting messages. Strong crisis leadership requires thought given in advance to who needs information, how quickly, in what form, and from whom. And fifth, it looks like preparedness and mindset. This is a big one. Some leaders become overwhelmed not because they lack intelligence, but because they have never trained themselves to operate under pressure with structure. A crisis is emotional. It's disruptive. It compresses time, and it can trigger fear, urgency, frustration, and defensiveness. Leadership before the crisis includes preparing the mind to stay steady enough to think. That is part of the work too. This is one of the reasons I often say crisis management is not just operational. It is deeply behavioral. It tests systems, yes, but it also tests judgment. It tests leadership discipline. It tests communication behavior. It tests whether an organization can remain aligned when conditions become unstable. And that is why leadership must be built before the incident. Now let me make an important point. Preparing for crisis leadership does not mean predicting every possible event. That's not realistic. You're not trying to predict everything. You're trying to build the kind of leadership capability that can function well across many types of disruption. That includes the ability to slow down enough to think, prioritize clearly, ask better questions, communicate with consistency, avoid unnecessary escalation, and make decisions that protect what matters most. That is transferable leadership strength, and it connects directly to endurance. Because endurance in business is the ability to continue operating, make sound decisions, recover intelligently, and keep moving forward under pressure over time. Crisis leadership supports endurance because crisis is one of the moments when leadership capability becomes highly visible. If leadership loses clarity, the business often loses momentum. If leadership becomes inconsistent, the organization becomes fragmented. If leadership delays hard decisions, consequences grow. But when leadership has already built discipline before the crisis, the organization has a stronger chance of staying functional, focused, and forward moving even when the situation is difficult. That is what enduring businesses do better. They do not assume leadership will simply rise to the occasion. They prepare leadership to meet the occasion. That is a major difference. Now, what are some signs that crisis leadership may not be prepared enough? If response authority is unclear, if escalation paths are vague, if important decisions rely too heavily on one person, if communications would likely be improvised, if leaders have never practiced together under pressure, if no one has defined what the first hour should look like, if the organization has plans but little confidence in how leadership would actually perform. Those are signals, not reasons for panic, but reasons to strengthen capability. And that is good news, because crisis leadership can be improved. It can be strengthened through scenario discussions, tabletop exercises, clarified roles, decision frameworks, communication planning, after-action learning, and repeated exposure to disciplined preparedness thinking. This is why exercises matter so much. Exercises do more than test plans. They test leadership behavior. They show how people think, how they communicate, where assumptions break down, where decisions stall, and where clarity is missing. That is valuable, because it is much better to discover those things in practice than in a real event. So here's today's leadership takeaway. Crisis leadership does not begin when the crisis starts. It begins long before that through clarity, preparation, discipline, and practice. That is the truth. And here's today's question for you. If a serious disruption hit today, what in your leadership approach would already be strong, and what would still be too dependent on improvisation? That is a powerful question, because the answer reveals whether leadership readiness is real or mostly assumed. Thank you for joining me today on the Morning Endurance Call. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, join the free endurance community. That is where I'm sharing additional resources, tools, live learning, and ongoing conversations for business owners, executives, and practitioners who want to build stronger businesses through preparedness, leadership, and endurance. The link will be in the description below. On our next episode, we'll continue building on this foundation and talk more about what enduring businesses do differently over time. Until then, think clearly, prepare deliberately, lead with endurance. Thanks for joining.